Hello and welcome back to the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. Today we have a special series, just solo episode. This is our first solo episode. And I wanted to take this time to address some of the questions we've been receiving over the past few months as it pertains to the podcast, my personal life, different things that don't necessarily always get talked about in the actual podcast. And I wanted to take an opportunity or a moment to talk through those things. The first thing I want to talk about today is the month of August. The month of August, a lot of people have been asking, it's the 30-day challenge. It's when all that happened, but it's also when we PR'd the amount of mileage we've ever ran in a month. And how all that came about, everyone hears, oh, you ran 406 miles in 1 month. How'd you do it? What'd it feel like? Why would you do that? All these different questions. And I'm going to try to work through this methodically to answer all those as we go. Essentially, where that originated from is back in June of 2024. And I keep looking over because I have my metrics right here. But in June of 2024, we were training, we were in a build, and we ran 275 miles. And during that month, and it was in Austin, Texas, it's a hot month. I ran a little bit of it in Virginia that month too, but regardless, it was hot and it was a challenge. Those 275 miles were grueling. And I remember getting towards the end of the month and thinking, and this is in June, like, wow, what if we could run 300? And I thought that it was possible. I knew that it was possible, but I wasn't sure if I could get the last 25 in one day, given what we'd already ran earlier in the month. And so I talked to my coach about it, who's Matt Johnson. Shout out Matty J. And he's like, he trusts me. He says, if you feel like you can do it and you can stay healthy, send it. If not, we got bigger fish to fry. And so I made the decision to not push for 300 in June, use July as kind of a maintenance month. And then I wanted to push for 300 in August. And I'd communicated that to Matt. And that was going to be a goal before we really started to dial it in for a build for some of the upcoming races I'm going to talk about in a minute. So July goes off without a hitch, pretty smooth month, a little bit of travel. Got to do some altitude training in Colorado, which I think was only beneficial in the long run. And then we stepped into August 1st. So probably 3 days before August, I talked to Matt. He'd sent over the plan to do this 300-mile challenge in the month of August. And he said, I've programmed it to 360 trip, not 300. And I remember even in that moment, I'm like, why the hell, if I wanted 300, why would you put it at 360? I didn't say anything, but I was just like, okay, I took it as a marker of belief. I was like, well, if he believes I can do this, I certainly can. And so we embarked in that journey together. And what it looked like over the course of the month is we got to the last week, and I'll go through the whole month, but I want to get into where the 406 came from. We got into the last week, and I knew I was going to hit the 360. And I'm a math freak. And I started playing with numbers, and I was like, man, I wonder what I would have to run in total volume this month to average a half marathon a day for the entire month of August. And so I did that math, and that math came out to 406.4, roughly. And so I said, okay, screw 360. We're going for 406. And we ended up getting it. It was nothing but a grind. It was grueling that last week, but it was totally worth it. And we stepped out of it with no injuries. The day after we did it, we did the Chad, which is a hero workout. It's a weighted vest, 1,000 step ups, and the legs were intact for that. So that kind of gave me a really good barometer, if you will, of where my body's at physically, where my head's at mentally, how things are syncing up emotionally. And I was like, okay, I can push that hard for a whole month, and then I can go hit this hero workout. We're in good shape. So that felt great, but I want to work back through that month and really what it looked like. A lot of people, when I would have a conversation around running, they want to ask me or say to me like, man, I hate running. I can't believe you love it. Like I could never do that. And I've said this before on the podcast itself, and I'm going to say it again here. I do not like running. Like I just don't. it gives me like the act of it actually. Like I'm never, I can't say never, but rarely am I running and I'm like, man, this is the best I've ever felt. I don't run for what it gives me in the moment. It's like a delayed gratification sort of thing for me. I run for what it gives me when I complete it, which is in my life the opposite of what I've pursued for the majority. The majority of my life, I've pursued that quick fix in the moment, feel better right now, and I'll deal with the repercussions later. Running is kind of flip-flop for me. It is deal with what you need to deal with right now, and then afterwards you'll feel better. And so that's kind of why I run. So it's certainly not because I love the act of it or it feels good. So with all that being said, there was never a morning I woke up and was thrilled to go after this challenge or like I was excited about it. That was never the feeling. That was never the case. It was every morning waking up. And if you listen to the 30-day challenge, part of that was journaling a word in the morning. And a lot of those mornings, the word was fear or doubt. And I would talk to God the whole way to Austin. I'd drive up here every day. And I would get here and I would just say, like, God, I'm going to put my shoes on. I need you to do the rest. And that's what happened. That was the only deal I made. I'd put my shoes on, tie my shoes, and I would take the first step, and then whatever happened would happen. For those of you that run a lot know, especially heavy volume, a lot of times the first mile, 2 miles, even 3 miles some days feels like absolute trash. Like your body feels like it's just like nothing's clicking, nothing's lubed up. It doesn't really matter if you warm up or don't warm up. I know that's probably going to get frowned upon. A bunch of people who are experts in this that don't do the volume. Subtle jab. Sorry to get off on that tangent, but point being, it just hurts. And you go these first few miles and the body's incredible because once it understands that mentally you're not going to check out, you're going to keep going. Your body figures it out. It's really smart, it's intelligent, and it can figure those things out to help keep you moving. And so usually by like mile 4 or 5 on the day, I felt okay. I felt good enough to keep going. And I tell that part of the story and why it's important to me is because in life's a lot like that. The first few steps can suck. Like it can be a struggle. There's some suffering involved. It feels unnatural. Different things are aching and hurting. And I'm not talking about just your body. I'm talking about mentally and emotionally. And so, but in life, if you keep going, a lot of times the weight comes off just a little bit at a time. And honestly, it's just enough weight to keep going forward. But you only get that if you keep moving. And so running's a lot like that for me. So there was never a morning I was excited for it, but I drove up here and I'd talk to God and I'd put my shoes on and I'd start. And when you average a half marathon a day for a month, the way that programming looks or that volume looks isn't you go out and run 13.1 miles a day. That's not how I did it. I broke it up, or my coach broke it up into a lot of, I would call them middle distance, like short to middle distance runs, which is essentially 10 miles. So there was a ton of 10 milers. There was a ton of split days. So you'd go out and run 10 in the morning, 5 in the evening. And then the weekends, there were some longer runs, 20 plus miles. So and that would give me Sundays off. So in theory, I took during the month 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days off. So I really only ran 26 days to get the 406. If I would have ran 31 and averaged that out, I probably would have ran closer to 460, 470. But we needed those days off. This was a massive volume increase. To go from 275 to 406 is a big jump. It's certainly more than 10%. It's more like, call it 25 to 30%, which I don't advise, but it was in my body. I knew I had it. My coach knew I had it. And as long as I understood that I needed to stay healthy for the races, I wasn't going to push myself too far. So we ran a lot of 10s, a lot of split 10-5s. We ran, like I said, some 20 milers. We ran a full marathon distance in there one weekend. And then that last week, like when we were supposed to actually taper into the 360, we had to re-peak again. So we had several weeks over 100 miles. We averaged 101.6 a week for weekly volume. That's heavy for me. Prior to this month, I'd only probably had 2 100-mile weeks ever in the last 4 years. And to be able to string that together in a month and see what the body's actually capable of, I think mentally really puts you in a place where it's like, wow, it doesn't really matter how bad it hurts. My body has the ability to keep moving forward. So a lot of people ask where the 406 came from. I feel like I've addressed that. It was to get to the half marathon a day for the entire month of August. The why. So back in April of last year, I gave my first set of speeches to some health and PE classes back home in Roanoke, Virginia. And a comment had been made or a question had been asked, and it was, why do you run every day? Like, I feel like kids, they follow you on social media, they see these things, and they're like, man, every day I get on there, you ran. And that stuck with me. And it was like, okay, I don't ever want there to be a day where some kid gets on my social media and he's counting on me to run that day in order to do what he needs to do because he's not up to strength that day. And I don't want him to get on there and see that I haven't ran. And so that started to stick with me in April, and it just built and built and built. And I think that, in full reflection, I never set out for this to be a goal. The first race I ever ran, or the first distance I ever thought was a miracle distance for myself, and it is a miracle distance, is a half marathon, period. To train for one, to run one, period. And to be able 4 years later to do that every single day for an entire month isn't an attribute to me. It's an attribute to God, his grace, his mercy, support systems, putting the right people around you, making the right decisions. And there's not a lot of luck involved with something like this. You can't get lucky and go run 400 miles in a month. That's not luck. It's a lot of hard work. The other part of this in the why portion is a lot of people won't say it, but I feel it and I see it. There's judgment around my size and the fact that I'm running as much as I am. During this month, I started at 217. So on August 1st, I was 217. By August 30th, coming to the close of the month, I was about 238. And so that's 21 pounds. I gained while running 400 miles in a month. And people ask, well, how in the heck is that possible? Well, the body swells, at least mine does. And it gets so inflamed and it's holding so much fluid and you have so much salt in your system that it's not really functioning appropriately. It's kind of in fight or flight mode. And when you're in that mode, there's something like when you've grown up in it, there's something so peaceful and serene about it. But it's also stressful. Like, your cortisol's through the roof. Your sleep isn't really that good because you're not able to really recover at a certain point. So the weight was hard. That definitely added stress. Most of the people you see doing this volume probably weigh between 120 and 160 pounds. So to be able to do it at 238 was pretty awesome. And I was pretty excited about that. So that was part of the why. The last part of the why, I guess, now that I'm thinking about it, is I'm building for a series of races that are coming up starting in December. And for those of you that have followed me for a while, you know the story. Got sober, did an Ironman, sold the bike literally like the next week, and never wanted to do an Ironman again. But I'd seen Nick Bear dive off into ultra marathons. And the same thing happened with the Ironman. I saw him do that, and I was like, well, 100-miler, I can go do that. And I knew it was going to be a challenge for me. 100 miles is a long way. It doesn't matter if you're 80 pounds or 300 pounds. 100 miles is 100 miles. And seeing him do that and knowing that it scared me is exactly why I signed up for the first one. So my story through the ultra marathon process is quite simple, actually. The first one I ever ran was in February 2022. And it was the Rocky Raccoon 100. I'd trained for it for 7 months. And towards the end of my training block for that race, I had like a mental, emotional struggle, if you will. And decided one day to go off script and go run a 40-mile run around Town Lake on heavy volume body, was worn out, was beat down, hadn't been sleeping. And I got injured that day. And this is probably 2 months out from my first 100-mile attempt. And I spent the next 2 months trying everything to get healthy. I'm talking acupuncture, like electromagnetic stuff, chiropractor, physical therapist, body specialist when it comes to like flossing. I mean, everything you could possibly imagine, I tried. And it was just to get healthy enough to show up to the start line healthy. And with that, I lost all my volume. So it takes, you don't lose it all right away. You can probably hold volume in your body and your conditioning for around 2 weeks before it starts to fall off. But if you go 2 months and you're rather sedentary and you're not doing a lot of running, it makes a big difference. There's no replacement for cardio training, for endurance, for running. Like, you have to run. You have to build up the endurance and the durability in the joints, the muscles, your entire frame. You can go ride the bike for 17 hours a day and going and running 100 miles. Like, that's not really going to help you that much. You might be able to get it done, but there's no replacement for the actual running volume. And I learned that the hard way the first year. We stepped off at the Rocky Raccoon 100. Body was not 100%. It was probably closer to 60, 65. And ended up pulling out of that race. My central nervous system shut down around 58, 59 miles, pulled out right after 60 and quit, rang the bell, if you will. And I stopped. And it took me about a month after that race to walk normal. It jacked me up pretty good. And I didn't help the situation. After that race, I was upset with the Austin Marathon because they wouldn't let me push my entry till the next year. And so I went and ran that race on a bum body and, just made it worse, and essentially had to take some significant time off from any type of activity after that in order to let the body recover. So that was February 2022. Probably around May of 2022, I decided, like, all right, we're going to do this again. Like, we're going to send it again. And I'm sorry, I keep saying February of 2022. I guess it was February of 2023. So May of 2023, I start training again because I'm like, all right, I have to do this now. I can't not do it. I can't not check it off the list. It's going to bother me too much. And I understand that might be a flaw in some people's eyes, but if I start something, I like to finish it. Even if I fail at it in the process, like, I want to go back. I want to learn about myself because I feel like there's so much more to learn in those missed miles. And so I start training again. I didn't hire a coach this year. So this is well before Matt Johnson era in my life. I was the first ultra I was working with NVDM. The second ultra, I decided I'm going to coach myself. So I build, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to, like, hold volume in my body, but not over push it and get to the race healthy. And I get in pretty decent shape that year. Not my best shape, but pretty decent shape. And but I never really got like heavy volume. So May through like September of 2023, I trained myself, wrote my own programming. And then November, I realized, oh crap, like, I think I've messed this up. I wonder if I still have time to save it. Let me hire a coach that knows what they're doing when it comes to this ultra distance. And that's when I reached out to Matt Johnson. That was the first time. So this is it's about a year ago now, a little less maybe. So I reach out to him. We've only been working together for about a year. I reach out to him and I'm like, hey, here's where I'm at. This is what I want to do. What do I need? Like, what's the roadmap to get me there? And he told me straight up, he's like, it's going to be rough, but you can do it. And here's how, like, here's the programming, here's the plan. And so I followed the programming, I followed the plan. And during this process, I changed my running form too. So I was going to a specialist who specializes in running, in physical therapy and body movement and how everything in the chain works. And he essentially tells me one day, he's like, Trip, the reason your hips are hurting is because you're heel striking so bad. He's like, you got to learn to run on your forefoot, and run closer to your toes. So in probably December of 23, I started running on my toes. Well, all the volume I'd built was through my heels, and people would be like, well, it doesn't matter, you're running. It absolutely matters, because that strike difference or strike change completely changes the way that force works upstream in the body. And so now essentially I was restarting from scratch. So December, I start running on my toes. I get in pretty good shape. And I'm like, all right, we're going to show up in February 24 at this race, and we're going to just finish it, and I'm going to be done. And this is going to be the end of the story. I'm going to move on to something else. So I show up and I start the race. It flooded the night before. Like, this is no lie. It flooded. And this isn't an excuse because lots of people finished anyway. It flooded the night before. We're running. I'm probably 20 miles in, close to it. And I slip. And when I slip, I feel something in my groin. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, now for some reason, when I go to hit my forefoot when I'm running, all that pressure is shooting up through my groin. The only thing I knew to do in that moment was switch my form to keep going. And it was like, okay, I just have to beat last year. Like, I'm not even worried about the 100 miles. We got to get deeper than we got last year. We've got to learn something from this. And so for the next 45 miles or so, I went back to the heel striking, went back to my old form, knowing that there was only a matter of time before that part of my body broke down again and my hips shut down. And so we got to 65 miles and pulled out and rang the bell, if you will, and I quit again. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I came back. My body wasn't in as bad a shape as it was the year before. I'd made a decision during that race that I didn't want to have to take 8 to 12 weeks off. And in order to do that, I had to be smart and I had to stop when I needed to stop. And looking back now in reflection, what that really represents is like that race wasn't my Super Bowl that year by any means. I was doing it to, like I said, I needed to show up and prove to myself that I wouldn't quit. But I think that at the end of the day, there was probably some other reasons in there that maybe weren't the best, like, you know, to prove people wrong or things out of spite, something along those lines. I'm not proud to say that. I'm just saying you limit yourself when you live in that type of belief. So I pull out of the race. I get back to the Airbnb and I was sitting there talking to my friends and my crew. And I made up my mind, like right then and there, that we're going to do things different this whole year. I'm going to retain Matt Johnson as my coach. I'd already started working with him, but I'm going to retain him. I'm going to do all the volume. I'm going to do all the strength. I'm going to do everything necessary. I'm going all in on this because I need to prove to myself not only that I can do it, but what it really looks like to go all in. And so since February of 2024, it's August of 2024 now, so that's 6 months, or sorry, it's October now. That's 8 months, but August was 6 months. Now we're at 8 months in. I've been all in on this journey in this race that's coming back up in February. And the volume's there, the conditioning's there, everything's there. We just got to go prove it to ourselves mentally now that that's there. And so we're excited for that. With all that being said, before I dive into February's race and that redemption of what I've just explained of 2 years failure at that location, there was another opportunity that popped up to race in December. December 7th is the Brazos Bend 100. It's just outside of Houston. It's a flat track. If those of you that know Austin or Lady Bird, it's very similar to that. The biggest obstacle at that course is the alligators. Everything else is pretty straightforward. Relatively flat, like I said, and good soft packed dirt. So it's more of a time thing. I'm not going there to prove I can do the 100-mile distance. I just want to go see almost like how fast I can do 100 miles. So there's some time goals there. And right now in preparation for that, you know, today, this episode will probably come out a week or so before that race. But today it's October 28th, which puts us about 5 weeks out, 6 weeks out. And so we're in the last build for that race. We're peaking over the next 3 weeks, and then we'll taper off and we'll run that race and go for a time. And that'll be my first 100-mile finish. So we'll do that. And then we have 2 months from then until February to more or less rest, recover, maintain, dial it in as far as nutrition and weight goes, all those important things, because the ultimate goal is to show up that first weekend in February at the Rocky Raccoon 100 primed. I mean, dialed in, locked in, like body's good, mind's good, heart's good. We're going to send it with everything we have. It's die or finish. Like that's where the mindset is. That's what we're shooting for. That's what we're going to do. And that might sound scary or terrifying to some people, but it is what it is. Like this year, that is my Super Bowl race. So we're gonna do that race. We're gonna finish it. It's gonna be a success. That'll put us at 2 100-mile finishes in a probably 8-week span, 7-week span, which is a little bit crazy too. And I've gotten some feedback around that, and I appreciate it. And we're gonna do it anyways. Thanks for your input. And it's not an ego thing for me. It's just based on evidence. The work's been done. It's all right here in my Garmin app, in my Strava. The work's been done. So now we just get to go celebrate it. And I thought that would be the end of my ultra marathon career in February. I was like, you know what? After this, I'm done. I've checked the box. It's time to move on to something bigger and better. And then something else came up. And those of you that know me are not shocked. You know, when I say that, they're like, yeah, of course it did. Something's always coming up when it comes to this stuff. But I genuinely mean this. My last effort in the ultra marathon community will take place in April. And it's going to take place in April in Roanoke, Virginia, in my hometown. So last year I went and ran a half marathon with my friend. It was his first one. I promised if he ever signed up for one, I would go run it with him. I did that. It's considered the world's toughest road race. It's the Blue Ridge Marathon in Roanoke, Virginia. It's a ton of elevation gain, elevation change. I really don't know if it's the hardest road race. I would say that there's probably other races out there that are way harder, but it's labeled that, so we're going to use it. And we're going to step into that race. We had originally planned to step into that race because they offer a double marathon distance, which is obviously an ultra distance. Anything over 50K is ultra. And we're like, okay, let's go run this double marathon. I'm going to crew, like my entire crew for that race, I wanted to comprise of addicts, former addicts, because I want to do well. And then when they ask at the end of the race, like, man, you know, how was it? How'd you guys do? I just want to be able to look them dead, stone cold in the face and be like, awesome, man. We're nothing but a bunch of addicts. And again, it's to crush that stigma, especially in my hometown. You know, it's not like Austin, Texas. Austin, Texas, the stigma exists here, but it's nothing like it is in some of these other locations. There's a lot less judgment here, a lot more acceptance. Some of these other locations, you know, it's still this very hidden, dark thing if someone was a former addict, alcoholic, or is a current addict or alcoholic. And so we're on a mission to crush that stigma. Part of that is going and doing this race and honestly throwing it back in their face and be like, well, what's your excuse? So that was the goal. And then when I was home 2 weeks ago, a close friend of mine who has helped me a lot with the speaking engagements, I got to meet her husband. He's like, Trip, why would you run the double marathon? Why wouldn't you just do the GOAT? And I was like, the hell's the GOAT? And he tells me, essentially, they put on this event. So you have 7 days, and it's the week of the Blue Ridge Marathon, but you have to run every distance that the race offers in those 7 days on their course. And what that looks like is a full marathon, and then the next day you would run a half marathon, then the next day you would run a 10K, and then the next day you would run a 5K, and then the next night you would start the double marathon. And so overall mileage, you're looking at 23, a little over 100 miles for the 7-day span. So it's nothing we haven't done before. I would say the elevation is going to make it a little tricky and the hills will make it a little tricky, but it's going to be fun. It's going to be a blast. It's going to help crush the stigma. And again, it's all about speaking out, recovering out loud, especially giving back to your community in a way that kind of represents what you want it to shift to or look like. So that's why we're doing that one. And then at the end of that race, my plan wholeheartedly is to move away from the ultra marathon distance. I haven't really decided exactly what I want to shift it to. There's a couple things in the pot. There will definitely be some form of fitness in my life, probably on an obsessive level until the day that I die. But I'm just not sure I have anything left to prove in this world. I don't want to continue to beat my body in this way. I don't want to continue to limit myself as far as strength goes or different things in that world just to be able to run heavy volume every single week. And so I kind of want to adjust my fitness. I don't think I'll ever stop running because of what it gives me, but the distances and the volume, I think I foresee a change. And so that kind of wraps up the race schedule for the remainder of the year. So December 7th, first weekend of February, and in April, we'll do ultra marathon distances. and then we'll shift to something else, and we'll keep you posted on what exactly that is. Like I said, there's a couple things in the pipe, but right now the focus is setting a good time, good baseline in December at that 100-miler, getting redemption in February, and then crushing the stigma in April. And that trifecta of things will satisfy me. I know that. And so that's where we're at. That's where we're headed. I appreciate all the love and support. I hope this wasn't a ridiculously annoying episode just listening to me yap for 20 to 30 minutes. But I wanted to provide an update and kind of some insight on what's happening in my life as far as running goes. We'll do more episodes like this depending on the feedback, and I'm open to talking about anything that you guys want to hear discussed, or like my point of view or perspective on it. Hop in the comments, hop in the DMs, let me know, and I will happily address those items for the audience. I appreciate your time today. I hope you guys have a wonderful day. God bless. And that's going to do it for today's episode on the Ain't Dead Yet podcast. Thank you.